So we've recently added some functionality which can allow for remote tunings. Ideally, we always like to do tunings in person. You catch a lot more things in person. You can be of better help, but due to COVID and other reasons, sometimes remote tuning is appropriate. So I'll go through a quick basic example of how this might work. So typically we'd have to create a map, cabin map for your aircraft in advance. I have one set up here. Should have the layout, approximate floor layout. You should see the number of amplifiers defined appropriately. We label each seating position as well as each speaker in the aircraft. We typically turn diagnostic mode on here. So this will disable the current entertainment audio. If there's any entertainment audio playing, put it in diagnostic mode, and then we can proceed with doing our testing of the system. I'm going to click on this ML number 1 speaker here, and we see our pop-up window for our speaker check. Usually we start with identifying each of the speakers throughout the cabin, make sure our expected channel assignment matches the prints. So we want to make sure when we send audio out of channel 1, it comes out of the correct speaker, so we have everything mapped appropriately. I'm going to go ahead and click identify here.
Identifying speaker left 1. Identifying speaker left 1.
And that does play out of speaker left number 1. So you would go around the cabin, select your speaker, press identify, and you should hear the appropriate sound come out of the correct speaker. You will go ahead and hit pass on each one that passes, or take notes if they do not match. Typically this isn't done solo. Typically you have an Alto engineer or technician working with you over the phone. If you find any discrepancies, you can usually correct them at this point to match how the aircraft is wired if we have to load a new configuration, something like that. So let's go back to our test speaker here. I only have one speaker hooked up for the demo today. We have the sweep functionality. So after we've identified each speaker location, we like to check for rub and buzz. You usually won't capture this on measurements too clearly, but if you play a tone and sweep through the frequency range, you'll often hear buzzing or rattling. You want to hear a nice clean note, but you do not want to hear some screws buzzing. So we'll go ahead and press sweep here, and you can hear that speaker playing. You want to ramp up your volume so it's nice and loud, almost uncomfortably loud, and we'll sweep through the frequency range slowly. If we hear any buzzing, we might stop it and put our head next to the speaker, listen a little more closely. You want to listen to see if any speakers sound different than the others. Typically mid-highs aren't too bad. You want to sweep them from 150 Hertz to about 500 Hertz. And then for the woofers, once you select a woofer here, you'll do the same sweep, but the frequency range you'll be looking at is going to be much lower. Obviously, you're going to want to sweep from 40 Hertz up to about 250 Hertz and check for rubbing and buzzing there. One thing you can do, you can put your hand on the speaker, see if that alleviates any buzzing. There are loose screws. Usually you can identify them, moving your hand around, pushing, pressing on different parts of the speaker. Again, any hard materials you want to isolate with something soft. If woofers are mounted on thin bulkheads, or if they're mounted in cabinets with a lot of drawers, typically those are the most challenging scenarios where you have to add foam tape, you have to add soft materials to try to tighten things, latches, screws, to minimize the buzzing, so the end listening experience is good for the final customer. Once your rub and buzz is good, you'll move on to your measurements. You take a measurement near field, 2 to 3 inches away of each speaker. We'll work with you and instruct you how to take those measurements. We'll check them as we go to make sure they're being measured appropriately. And then once all the near field measurements are done, we'll move on to in-seat measurements. So during the in-seat measurements, you'll hear chirps come out of each of the set of speakers. You'll hear them come out of the left, the right, and each woofer individually. We record the magnitude and phase response of each speaker, and we can figure out the best way to sum the sound together at each seat. We can see if adding a few milliseconds delay results in the bass adding up rather than canceling out in the VIP seats or throughout the cabin. So we can do a lot of manipulation with phase and magnitude response to get a nice even flat response in all the seats. And finally, after all the measurements in each seat are complete, we'll upload those measurements to an engineer at Alto, and then it'll take us anywhere from 1 to 3 hours to work with those measurements to create the amplifier files, which will have the perfectly tuned and properly configured settings. And once that's complete, we'll go ahead and load them using the database tab. And then finally listen, the best part. I believe that sums up the amplifier demo. And if you have any questions or need any help along the way, please feel free to give us a call. Thank you.